I never imagined my life could feel so small, until the day Jameson Carmichael stood on that stage in front of hundreds of people, calling me the dumb wife while holding his mistress's hand like a trophy. Our son, Brandon, was graduating magna cum laude from Princeton, and Jameson couldn't resist making the moment about himself, about his success, about his generosity, about everything but the actual graduate. Brandon gets his brains from me, of course, Jameson announced with that trademark smile that had charmed clients and mistresses alike for 23 years. Certainly not from his mother. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through the audience. I felt the burn of dozens of eyes glancing my way, then quickly averting their gaze. I sat frozen in the second row, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles had gone white. My navy blue dress, the one I'd spent weeks searching for, wanting to look perfect for Brandon's big day, suddenly felt too tight around my chest. I forced the corners of my mouth upward, the smile that had become my armor, my shield, my mask. Brandon shifted uncomfortably on stage. For a fleeting moment, our eyes met, and I saw something there, embarrassment, confusion, perhaps even a flash of defense, before he looked away. At 22, he was caught between the boy who had once fiercely protected his mother and the man desperate for his father's approval. As most of you know, Jameson continued, his voice amplified by the microphone, his arm now draped possessively around Lila Grant's slender waist, Carmichael Enterprises just hit the $75 million mark this quarter. Not bad for a kid who started with nothing but guts and a good head for numbers. More applause. Lila, 28, blonde, with legs that seemed to start at her neck, beamed up at him adoringly. Her red dress was striking against the wood-paneled backdrop of the university hall. It was also at least 3 sizes smaller than anything I could fit into now. "And it's all going to be yours one day, son," Jameson announced grandly. "The company, the Tesla, the mansion in Greenwich, all of it. Because that's what real success looks like. That's the Carmichael legacy." I thought about the young Jameson I'd fallen in love with at 19. Ambitious, yes, but also kind and idealistic. The man who'd whispered poetry to me under streetlights and promised me the moon. The father who'd cried when he first held Brandon, whispering that nothing had ever felt more important. When had that man disappeared? Or had he ever really existed at all? The ceremony dragged on endlessly. Every minute was an exercise in endurance, in keeping that mask firmly in place. I'd perfected this particular skill over years of company parties, charity galas, and family dinners where I was both present and invisible, the silent trophy wife who had long since lost her shine. When Brandon finally walked across the stage to receive his diploma, I stood and clapped until my palms stung. This brilliant, compassionate young man was the one true light in my life, my greatest achievement. Yet even in this moment, I felt Jameson's ownership extending to him, claiming Brandon's accomplishments as reflections of his own brilliance, his own genes, his own destiny. After the ceremony, we gathered outside on the immaculate lawn where champagne flowed freely and proud parents took endless photographs. I stood awkwardly at the edge of our group, watching as Jameson introduced Lila to his business associates as the brilliant mind behind our new marketing strategy. No one seemed particularly surprised or bothered by her presence. Had everyone known? Had I been the only one blind to this humiliation? "Eleanor!" The voice came from somewhere to my left, unfamiliar and low. I turned to find a man I didn't recognize. Silver-haired, distinguished, with kind eyes that seemed to see right through me. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" I asked, instinctively glancing around, to see if anyone was watching us. "No," he said simply, "but I know your husband, and I know what it's like to stand in the shadows while someone else claims the spotlight." Something in his tone made me pause. There was no pity there, only understanding and perhaps something else. Recognition. "This isn't the time," I began, but he was already pressing something into my hand. A thick, cream-colored envelope, heavy with promise. "Now it's your turn," he whispered, his eyes holding mine for one electric moment before he disappeared into the crowd. I stood there, the envelope burning in my hand, as Brandon approached with his father and Lila in tow. My son's eyes dropped to the envelope, then back to my face, a question forming that he didn't voice. "Mom," he said instead, awkwardly leaning in, to kiss my cheek. "Thanks for coming." As if I would miss this. As if I hadn't been the one who'd stayed up late helping him with college applications, who'd proofread his essays, who'd sent care packages and called twice a week just to hear his voice. I wouldn't have missed it for the world, sweetheart. I said, meaning every word. I'm so proud of you. Jameson checked his watch impatiently. We've got that dinner reservation at 7, Brandon. Your mother understands if you want to celebrate with friends instead. Right, Eleanor? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. The weight of the envelope in my hand seemed to grow heavier by the second. Actually, Brandon said, surprising me, I'd really like Mom to come to dinner with us. Lila's perfect smile faltered. Jameson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, he said, his voice smooth as silk. The more the merrier. Though I hope you don't mind if Lila joins us. She's practically family now. The words cut deeper than he could possibly know. Or perhaps he knew exactly how deeply they would cut. What's in the envelope? Brandon asked, nodding toward my hand. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. The world seemed to slow down, the sounds of celebration fading into the background. For 23 years, I had been the good wife, the silent partner, the woman who looked the other way. For 23 years, I had swallowed my pride, my ambitions, my voice. My fingers traced the edge of the envelope. Whatever was inside had the potential to change everything. I could feel it with a certainty that both terrified and exhilarated me. I'm not sure yet, I said quietly, but I think I'm about to find out. The restaurant Jameson had chosen was exactly his style. Exclusive, overpriced, and designed to impress rather than comfort. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, and the white tablecloths were so crisp they could probably stand on their own. A pianist played softly in the corner, the music drifting over conversations conducted in respectfully hushed tones. We were seated at the best table, of course. Jameson Carmichael wouldn't settle for anything less. Brandon sat between his father and me, with Lila on Jameson's other side. The envelope remained in my purse, untouched but impossible to forget. To the graduate, Jameson announced, raising his glass of 30-year-old scotch. And to new beginnings. His eyes flickered meaningfully to Lila, who smiled with practiced perfection. I sipped my champagne and wondered when exactly I had become so invisible in my own life. So, Brandon, Lila said, leaning forward to showcase both her interest and her cleavage. Your father tells me you're considering joining Carmichael Enterprises right away rather than pursuing that PhD program. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. I haven't decided yet, he said, glancing at me. Mom thinks I should follow through with the PhD since I've already been accepted. Your mother, Jameson interjected with a dismissive wave, has always been overly cautious, afraid to take risks. That's why she's never amounted to much beyond being Mrs. Carmichael. The table fell silent. Even Lila looked uncomfortable with the blatant cruelty. Dad, Brandon said, his voice tight. It's just the truth, son, Jameson continued, unrepentant. In business, you have to recognize when someone's an asset or a liability. Your mother has been content to coast on my success for decades. Is that really the example you want to follow? 23 years of silence pressed against my throat. 23 years of swallowed retorts and buried dreams. 23 years of watching this man rewrite our history to cast himself as the hero and me as the fortunate bystander. I thought about the mysterious envelope in my purse. I thought about the stranger's words. Now it's your turn. Actually, I said, surprising even myself with how steady my voice sounded. I think it's time I shared something with all of you. I reached for my purse and withdrew the envelope. The heavy cream paper felt significant in my hands, a weight and substance I hadn't felt in my own life for years. What's this? A graduation card? Jameson asked, his tone making it clear how insignificant he found anything I might have to offer. I'm not sure, I admitted, carefully breaking the seal. A man gave it to me after the ceremony. He said it was my turn. Your turn for what? Lila asked, curiosity overriding her usual strategy of pretending I didn't exist. I guess we'll find out, I said, sliding my finger under the flap. Inside the envelope were several documents, neatly arranged and labeled. The first was a letter addressed to me in elegant handwriting. Dear Eleanor, I read aloud, my voice gaining strength with each word. You don't know me, but I was Robert Carmichael's closest friend. Jameson's head snapped up at the mention of his father's name. Robert spoke of you often in his final days, not as his son's wife, but as the true creative force behind Carmichael Enterprises. He regretted never acknowledging your contributions publicly, and he made me promise to right that wrong. When the time was right. That time is now. The restaurant seemed to fade away as I continued reading. Enclosed, you will find documentation of the true history of Carmichael Enterprises, including original business plans in your handwriting, patent applications listing you as co-inventor, and correspondence between Robert and his attorneys acknowledging your role as the company's silent partner. My hands trembled slightly as I set down the letter and examined the other documents in the envelope. There they were. My original sketches for what would become Carmichael Enterprises' most profitable products. The business plan I'd written during those early years, when Jameson and I would stay up all night dreaming of the future. Patents with my name carefully typed beside his, then crossed out. In later versions. "What the hell is this?" Jameson demanded, his face flushing an ugly red. "The truth," I said simply, looking directly into his eyes perhaps for the first time in years. The truth about who really built Carmichael Enterprises. Brandon reached for the documents, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. "Mom, is this for real?" "Every word," I confirmed. "Your grandfather knew. He always knew." "This is absurd," Jameson sputtered, attempting to grab the papers from Brandon's hands. "My father would never—" "But he did," I interrupted, a strange calm settling over me. "And there's more." I pulled out the final document, a legal agreement dated just 2 weeks before Robert Carmichael's death 3 years ago. "What your father never told you," I said, quietly, "was that he restructured the company ownership before he died. 51% of Carmichael Enterprises belongs to me. It has for 3 years. I just never knew it until now." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the pianist seemed to have paused. Lila was the first to recover. "Jamie," she said, her voice sharp with panic, "tell me this isn't true." Jameson's face had gone from red to ashen. "It can't be," he whispered, but the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. Brandon looked from his father to me, then back again. "All these years," he said slowly, "you've been telling me Mom was just along for the ride, that she was lucky you married her, that she had no head for business." "Brandon," Jameson began, but our son cut him off. "Did you know?" he demanded. "Did you know this whole time that Mom was behind the company's success?" The truth was written all over Jameson's face. Of course he had known. He had systematically erased me from the company's history, taking credit for my ideas, my innovations, my vision. "Why, Mom?" Brandon asked, turning to me with eyes that held both hurt and a new respect. "Why did you let him do this to you? Why stay silent? For so long?" It was the question I'd been asking myself since opening the envelope. Why had I allowed myself to be erased? The answer came to me with surprising clarity. "For you," I said simply. "At first, it was because I loved your father and believed in our partnership. Later, it was because I wanted you to have a stable home, to admire your father, to believe in family. I thought my silence was a gift to you both." I looked at Jameson, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in decades. "But I was wrong," I continued, my voice gathering strength. "Silence isn't a gift. It's surrender. And I'm done surrendering." The maitre d' approached our table with a concerned expression, no doubt noticing the tension crackling between us. "Is everything all right with your meal, Mr. Carmichael?" Jameson's mask slipped back into place with practiced ease. "Everything's fine," he replied smoothly, though his knuckles were white around his Scotch glass. "Just a small family discussion." The maitre d' nodded and retreated, but not before I caught his curious glance at the documents spread across our pristine tablecloth. "We should discuss this privately," Jameson hissed, his voice low but venomous. "This is hardly the place for the truth," I finished for him. 23 years of deference made the interruption feel almost physically painful, but I pushed through it. "I disagree. The truth works anywhere, Jameson." Lila shifted uncomfortably in her seat, suddenly fascinated by her fingernails. The mistress role had clear parameters. Be beautiful, be available, be adoring. But this situation wasn't covered in the unofficial handbook. "Jamie," she began tentatively, "maybe we should—" "Not now, Lila," he snapped, his eyes never leaving mine. I watched as something hardened in Lila's expression. Perhaps she was getting her first real glimpse of the man behind the charming facade. Part of me almost felt sorry for her. Brandon reached for the business plans, studying my familiar handwriting with new eyes. "The Martinson-Hayes distribution model," he murmured. "That was your idea?" "Dad always talks about how that revolutionized the company's growth in the early years." "It was," I confirmed quietly. "I came up with it during that summer we spent at Lake George. You were just a baby." "I remember that summer differently," Jameson cut in. "I remember working 16-hour days while you played house with our son." The practiced cruelty in his tone no longer had the power to wound me. Something had fundamentally shifted inside me the moment I'd opened that envelope. "Is that what you told yourself?" I asked, genuinely curious now. That caring for our child was playing house? That the hours I spent at night working on these plans, after you'd gone to bed after I'd fed and bathed and soothed our son, didn't count as real work? Brandon was moving through the documents methodically now, his analytical mind, the one Jameson so proudly claimed came from him, piecing together the true history of Carmichael Enterprises. "The Palmer acquisition," he said, holding up a letter written in my hand. "The pivot to sustainable materials in 2010. The entire Pacific Rim expansion strategy." His voice grew more incredulous with each discovery. "Mom, you did all of this?" "We did it together at first," I answered honestly. "In the beginning, it really was a partnership. Your father has always been brilliant with people, with making connections, with selling the vision. I was better behind the scenes with strategy and innovation. But somewhere along the way," Brandon concluded, "he started taking all the credit. And you let him," Jameson added, a hint of accusation in his tone, as if my silence had been the true betrayal. "Yes," I acknowledged. "I did." The pianist had resumed playing, a melancholy tune that seemed oddly appropriate for the unraveling of my life's greatest deception, the lie that I had been merely a spectator to my husband's success rather than its architect. "Why now?" Jameson demanded suddenly. "Why humiliate me publicly? Why not come to me privately with these claims?" The way he said claims made it clear he still wasn't acknowledging the truth, even with the evidence laid out before him. "Would you have listened?" I asked simply. His silence was answer enough. "And I'm not trying to humiliate you, Jameson. I'm simply reclaiming my voice. There's a difference. A difference that could cost me everything," he growled. "Cost us everything," I corrected gently. 51%, remember? Although I'm not sure Robert intended for me to actually use that power, I think he just wanted me to know I had it. Something flickered across Jameson's face. Calculation, perhaps. I recognized it well. I'd seen it countless times across negotiating tables as he sized up opponents. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Money? Public acknowledgement? What's your price, Eleanor?" The question hung between us, heavy with 2 decades of accumulated resentments and missed opportunities. What did I want? I'd spent so long suppressing my own desires that the question felt almost foreign. I began, but Brandon interrupted. "She doesn't owe you an answer right now," he said firmly, surprising both of us. "And she certainly doesn't need to negotiate with you at dinner on what should be a celebration of my graduation." Jameson blinked, unused to being challenged by his son. "Brandon, you don't understand the complexities of—" "I understand enough," Brandon replied, standing abruptly. "I understand that you've lied to me my entire life about Mom's role in the company. I understand that you've been parading your mistress around publicly while humiliating the woman who helped build everything you claim credit for." He turned to me, his expression softening. "Mom, would you like to leave?" It was such a simple question, but it represented a choice I hadn't been offered in years. The choice to walk away from Jameson's script, from the role I'd been assigned in the narrative of our family. "Yes," I said, gathering the documents and returning them carefully to the envelope. "I think I would." As I stood, Jameson grabbed my wrist, his fingers digging in with just enough pressure to make his desperation clear without leaving marks. "Eleanor, don't do this," he warned, his voice low. "Think about what you're throwing away." I looked down at his hand on my wrist, then up at his face. The face I'd once thought was the most handsome, the most trustworthy in the world. Now I could see the fear behind his anger, the insecurity beneath the bluster. "I'm not throwing away anything of value," I replied quietly. "I'm leaving behind a lie." Brandon placed his hand protectively on my shoulder. "Let her go, Dad." After a moment's hesitation, Jameson released my wrist, his expression hardening into something cold and unfamiliar. "You'll regret this," he said. "Both of you." Lila watched the exchange with wide eyes, perhaps wondering if she'd backed the wrong horse after all. "Goodbye, Jameson," I said, surprised by how final the words felt. "Brandon, are you coming?" My son nodded, placing a steadying hand on my back as we navigated between the tables toward the exit. I could feel the eyes of other diners following us, curious about the drama unfolding in their midst. Just before we reached the door, I heard Lila's voice rise in panicked question. "Jamie, what does this mean for us?" For the future you promised me? I didn't stay to hear his answer. Some truths weren't mine to witness. Outside, the spring evening was cool and clear. Brandon and I stood silently on the sidewalk for a moment, the weight of everything that had just happened settling around us like a heavy cloak. "Where to now, Mom?" he asked, his voice gentler than I'd heard it in years. I looked up at the stars, bright and unwavering above the city lights. For the first time in decades, the future wasn't predetermined by Jameson's wishes or expectations. It was a blank page, waiting to be filled. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think that's okay." The drive back to Brandon's apartment near campus was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The envelope sat on my lap, its contents having altered the gravitational center of our family in ways we were only beginning to understand. "You can stay with me tonight," Brandon offered as we pulled into the parking lot of his building. "I know it's not what you're used to, but it's perfect," I interrupted, touched by his concern. "Thank you." His apartment was exactly what you'd expect from a graduating senior. Mismatched furniture, walls adorned with framed academic certificates and movie posters, a kitchen that had seen more takeout containers than home-cooked meals. But it was clean and welcoming, a reflection of the thoughtful young man he'd become despite, or perhaps because of, the complicated dynamics of our family. "Tea?" he asked, moving to the kitchenette while I settled onto the worn sofa. "That would be lovely." As he filled the kettle, Brandon cleared his throat. "I have to ask, Mom, why didn't you ever tell me?" It was the question I'd been expecting, the one I'd been asking myself since opening the envelope. Why had I allowed my contributions to be erased? Why had I accepted being diminished year after year? "It's complicated," I began, then stopped myself. That was the easy answer, the one that absolved me of having to examine my own complicity in my erasure. "No, that's not fair to you. The truth is, at first it was a choice. Your father was building his reputation in the business world, and in those circles, having a female partner, especially a wife, wasn't always viewed favorably. So you stepped back to help him succeed?" Brandon asked, placing 2 steaming mugs on the coffee table. "Initially, yes. It seemed like a reasonable compromise at the time. Your father would be the face of the company, and I would be the mind behind many of its strategies. We were partners in the truest sense. What changed?" I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, drawing comfort from its heat. Success changed him. With each achievement, each expansion, each million added to the company's value, a little more of the man I married disappeared. He began to believe his own press, to internalize the idea that he alone was responsible for the company's success. "And you let him," Brandon said, not unkindly. "I did," I acknowledged. "At first, because I loved him and saw how much the recognition meant to him. Later, because I'd become so accustomed to my invisible role that stepping into the light seemed impossible. And then because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that if I challenged him, I would lose everything, the company, our marriage, even you." The admission felt raw and vulnerable, but Brandon deserved the truth. "Your father can be vindictive when his image is threatened." Brandon nodded slowly. "I've seen glimpses of that. More than glimpses lately." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of these revelations settling between us. "Do you resent me?" he asked suddenly, his voice small in a way I hadn't heard since he was a child. "For not seeing it? For buying into Dad's version of our family story?" My heart broke at the guilt in his eyes. "No, sweetheart, never. You were a child, and then a young man trying to navigate a complicated relationship with your father. That's not your fault. But tonight," he began, "tonight you stood up for me when it mattered most." I finished for him. That's all any mother could ask for. Brandon reached for the envelope, which I had placed on the coffee table between us. "May I?" he asked. I nodded, watching as he once again examined the evidence of my hidden career, my stolen legacy. His expression grew increasingly troubled as he read through the legal document detailing my majority ownership of Carmichael Enterprises. "This changes everything," he said finally. "Dad's been promising me a future with the company that wasn't entirely his to promise." "I don't think your grandfather intended to create this situation," I said carefully. "I believe he wanted to correct an injustice privately, without disrupting the company or the family. He never expected me to actually find out. But now, you have," Brandon pointed out. "So what are you going to do?" It was the $1 million question, or rather the $75 million question. "I don't know yet," I admitted. Until a few hours ago, I thought my professional legacy was being a supportive wife. Now I find out I'm majority owner of a company I've been systematically erased from. It's a lot to process. Brandon leaned back against the sofa cushions, his expression thoughtful. You know, all those years when Dad was telling me about the business, about what it would mean to take over someday, I always felt something was missing, like I wasn't getting the whole story. What do you mean? The strategies Dad described, the innovations he claimed credit for, they never quite matched what I knew of him. Dad's brilliant, eh? At making connections, at seeing opportunities, at closing deals. But the creative thinking, the long-term vision that built Carmichael Enterprises? He shook his head. That always seemed to come from somewhere else. Now I know it came from you. His words warmed something long cold inside me. The part that had yearned for recognition, not from the world, but from the one person whose opinion mattered most to me. Thank you for saying that, I whispered. Brandon set down his mug with new determination. So what's the plan? Are you going to confront Dad again? Take control of the company? Make a public statement? The questions tumbled out rapidly, each one representing a potential future I hadn't considered possible until tonight. The weight of possibility was both exhilarating and terrifying. I don't think I can answer that tonight, I said honestly. This is all overwhelming. Brandon nodded, accepting my uncertainty with a maturity that made my heart swell with pride. Whatever you decide, he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. I'm on your side, Mom. All the way. Tears pricked at my eyes. Not tears of sadness or regret, but of profound relief. For decades I had carried the weight of my silence alone. Now, at least, I had my son beside me, seeing me, truly seeing me, perhaps for the first time. There is one thing I know for certain, I said, a new resolve strengthening my voice. I won't go back to being invisible. Not ever again. As if to punctuate my declaration, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Jameson's name flashed on the screen, a digital demand for attention I was no longer obligated to answer. I declined the call, silencing the phone and placing it face down on the table. That's new, Brandon observed with the hint of a smile. Yes, I agreed, returning his smile with one of my own. Yes, it is. By morning, Jameson had called 17 times and left 8 voicemails, each progressively more desperate than the last. I listened to them while Brandon slept, the sky outside his apartment window gradually lightening from black to deep blue to the pale gold of dawn. Eleanor, be reasonable, Jameson's voice pleaded in the first message. We need to discuss this like adults. By the 8th voicemail, the veneer of civility had cracked completely. This is insanity. You'll destroy everything we've built. Think about Brandon's future, if not your own. I deleted them all, a strange sense of calm settling over me. For years, Jameson's moods had dictated the temperature of our home, the rhythm of our lives. His anger had been something to avoid at all costs, his approval the currency of my worth. Now listening to him rage and plead by turns, I felt oddly detached, as if I were watching a storm from inside a sturdy shelter, no longer at the mercy of its winds. Brandon emerged from his bedroom around 7, hair tousled, eyes still heavy with sleep. He stopped short when he saw me sitting at his small kitchen table, already dressed in yesterday's clothes, but with a fresh determination in my posture. You're up early, he observed, moving to the coffee maker. Couldn't sleep, I admitted. Too much on my mind. He nodded, understanding without needing elaboration. What's the plan for today? I took a deep breath. I think I need to go home, face Jameson, figure out what happens next. Brandon's shoulders tensed. I'm coming with you. Brandon? This isn't negotiable, Mom. His voice was firm, reminiscent of the tone I'd used when he was younger and trying to argue his way out of bedtime. I'm not letting you face him alone. Not after what I've seen. The protective fierceness in his expression brought tears to my eyes. For so long, I'd been the one protecting him. From disappointment, from the harsher realities of his father's character, from the fractures in our family facade. The role reversal was both painful and precious. Okay, I conceded. Together, then. We arrived at the, Greenwich Mansion just before noon. The house, with its manicured lawns, imposing columns, and perfectly symmetrical windows, had always felt more like a statement than a home. Today it felt like foreign territory, a battlefield I was entering with new intelligence about the enemy's weaknesses. Jameson's Tesla was in the circular driveway, alongside a red convertible I didn't recognize. Lila had apparently spent the night. I found myself oddly unmoved by this confirmation of their relationship. The betrayal that had once cut so deeply now seemed like a dull ache from an old wound, present, but no longer debilitating. "Ready?" Brandon asked as we sat in his car, staring at the house that had been my prison and palace for 2 decades. "As I'll ever be," I replied, reaching for the door handle. We found Jameson in his home office, a space designed to impress with its leather-bound books, antique desk, and awards displayed in custom-built cabinets. He looked up as we entered, his expression cycling rapidly from surprise to relief to wariness. "Eleanor," he said, rising from his chair. "Brandon, I've been trying to reach you." "I know," I replied simply. He gestured toward the sitting area in the corner of the office, a space where he often entertained important clients. "Let's talk reasonably about this." "Let's," I agreed, taking a seat in one of the armchairs while Brandon positioned himself protectively beside me. Jameson remained standing, his body language betraying the anxiety beneath his controlled facade. "I've spoken with our attorneys this morning. There are questions about the validity of that document you showed us last night." "Questions?" I repeated, unsurprised by this tactic. "Yes. Issues of authentication, proper procedures, my father's mental competence at the time of signing." He waved a hand dismissively. "Technical matters that could drag on for years if we let them." "Or," I prompted, recognizing the negotiation strategy I'd witnessed him use countless times. "Or we could come to a private arrangement, something that acknowledges your contributions while preserving the company's stability and Brandon's inheritance." I noticed he carefully avoided mentioning Lila, whose presence in the house was an unspoken complication to his sudden concern for our son's future. "What kind of arrangement did you have in mind?" asked, genuinely curious about how he planned to solve the problem I now represented. Jameson relaxed slightly, mistaking my question for interest in his proposal. "A generous financial settlement, public acknowledgement of your role as a valuable advisor to the company, perhaps a position on the board with no day-to-day responsibilities. Everyone saves face, and life goes on." "Life goes on," I repeated slowly. "Your life, you mean, with Lila, with the company, with the reputation you've built on my ideas." His expression hardened. "Don't be dramatic, Eleanor. Business is business. We both made choices." "Yes," I agreed. "We did. And now I'm making a new one." I reached into my purse and withdrew the envelope, placing it deliberately on the coffee table between us. "I'm not interested in a settlement, Jameson. I'm interested in the truth." "The truth," he scoffed, "is that I built Carmichael Enterprises. I made the deals, took the risks, put my name and reputation on the line. Without me, your ideas would have remained just that, ideas." "Perhaps," I acknowledged. "And without my ideas, you would have been just another charming man in a nice suit with nothing substantial to offer." Brandon shifted beside me, his discomfort with the confrontation evident, but his support unwavering. "Dad, you can't seriously be trying to minimize Mom's role after what we saw in those documents." Jameson's expression softened as he turned to our son. "Brandon, business is more complex than words on paper. Your mother contributed, yes, but building a company requires more than good ideas. It requires execution, leadership, vision." "Vision that came from her," Brandon interrupted. "Leadership that took credit for her work. Execution that erased her from the company's history." A flash of anger crossed Jameson's face. "You don't understand what you're talking about. You've seen a few documents and suddenly think you know the whole story?" "I know enough," Brandon replied steadily. "I know you've been lying to me my entire life about Mom's role. I know you've been parading your mistress around publicly while belittling the woman who helped build your success. And I know that grandfather saw through you before he died." Jameson flinched at the mention of his father, a reaction that confirmed my suspicions. Robert Carmichael had indeed intended this posthumous revelation as a reckoning for his son. "My father was old and easily manipulated," Jameson said, but the defense sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Was he?" I asked quietly. "Or was he simply clearer-sighted than you gave him credit for?" Jameson's composure finally cracked. "What do you want, Eleanor? To destroy everything? To take control of a company you haven't been involved with for years? To punish me? What's the endgame here?" It was the question I'd been asking myself since opening the envelope. What did I want? Revenge? Recognition? Restitution? The answer came to me with surprising clarity. "Justice," I said simply. "Not just for me, but for the truth, for the company's real history, for Brandon's understanding of his legacy. And how do you define justice in this situation? Jameson asked, his tone making it clear he expected demands he could counter, negotiate, or dismiss. I define it as honesty, I replied. A public acknowledgement of my role in founding and growing Carmichael Enterprises, my rightful place in the company's narrative and its future, and yes, recognition of my 51% ownership. Jameson paled. You can't be serious. The board would never. The board doesn't have a choice if I hold majority shares, I pointed out. But I'm not interested in ousting you, Jameson. Despite everything, I still believe you bring value to the company. What I won't accept is erasure. Not anymore. A tense silence filled the room as Jameson calculated his options, his eyes darting between my face and the envelope on the table. After what seemed like an eternity, he spoke. And if I refuse, if I challenge the document's validity in court, then we let the truth come out in the most public, most painful way possible, I said calmly. Every detail of how you systematically took credit for my work, every email, every draft, every patent application that was altered to remove my name, every testimony from people who knew the truth, including, I suspect, several board members who were friends with your father. Brandon leaned forward, his expression earnest. Dad, this doesn't have to be a war. Mom isn't looking to destroy you. She just wants what she's earned. Jameson's gaze shifted to our son, the heir he'd groomed so carefully to follow in his footsteps. And what about you? Where do you stand in all this? With the truth, Brandon answered without hesitation. Which means with Mom. Something in Jameson seemed to deflate at those words. For all his flaws, his love for Brandon, his pride in our son, had always been genuine. To lose that approval, that alliance cut deeper than any business threat could. Before Jameson could respond, the door to the office opened. Lila stood in the doorway, her confidence from the night before replaced by uncertainty. She looked from Jameson to me to Brandon, clearly trying to gauge the temperature of the room. Jamie, she ventured, is everything okay? The question hung in the air, weighted with implications that extended far beyond this moment. Was everything okay? Would it ever be again? And for whom? Everything's fine, Lila, Jameson replied automatically, though his voice lacked conviction. Just a family discussion. Lila hesitated in the doorway, caught between retreating to give us privacy and asserting her new place in Jameson's life. Should I come back later, or? The awkwardness of the moment would have been almost comical in other circumstances. The wife, the mistress, the son, and the man who had created this tangled web, all frozen in a tableau of discomfort. Actually, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice, you might as well stay. This concerns the future of Carmichael Enterprises, which apparently involves you now. Brandon shot me a questioning look, but I gave him a small nod of reassurance. Lila was a symptom of our broken marriage, not its cause. And if she was to be part of Jameson's future, she deserved to understand what she was really walking into. Mom, Brandon began cautiously. Are you sure? I'm sure, I confirmed, gesturing for Lila to join us. Please, sit down. Lila moved hesitantly into the room, perching on the edge of a chair as far from me as possible, while still being part of the conversation. Her youth was more apparent in daylight, the careful makeup, the designer clothes that didn't quite fit her, personal style, the nervous way she looked to Jameson for cues about how to behave. As I was saying, I continued, turning back to Jameson, I want recognition for my role in building this company. I want my name restored to its rightful place in the company's history and its future, and I want my ownership stake acknowledged. Lila's eyes widened. Ownership stake? She echoed, looking to Jameson for explanation. It's complicated, he hedged, clearly uncomfortable having this discussion in front of her. Eleanor has come into possession of some documents that suggest my father may have transferred shares to her before his death. 51% of the shares, Brandon clarified, unwilling to let his father minimize the situation, making Mom the majority owner of Carmichael Enterprises. Lila's perfectly shaped eyebrows shot up, her gaze swinging back to me with new assessment. I could almost see the recalculation happening behind her eyes, the sudden awareness that the dumb wife she'd been helping Jameson ridicule might actually hold the keys to the kingdom he'd promised her. I had no idea, she stammered. Few people did, I acknowledged, including me. Until yesterday. Jameson's father wanted to right a wrong before he died, but he did it in a way that protected his son's public image. And now you want to, what, Take over the company? Lila asked, a hint of hostility creeping into her tone. No, I said simply. I want the truth acknowledged. I want my contributions recognized. And I want a seat at the table I helped build. Jameson laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. After 20 years away from the business, you think you can just walk in and start making decisions? The company has evolved, Eleanor. It's not the small operation you remember. I'm well aware, I replied. I followed every development, every acquisition, every pivot. Did you really think I stopped paying attention just because you stopped asking for my input? This seemed to catch him off guard. You've been following the company? Of course. It was as much my creation as yours. More, in some ways. I leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. And I've noticed some concerning trends in recent years. The rush to maximize short-term profits at the expense of long-term growth. The abandonment of the sustainability initiatives I championed. The treatment of employees as disposable resources rather than valuable assets. Brandon looked between us with growing interest, while Lila shifted uncomfortably in her chair. You've lost your way, Jameson, I continued. Or perhaps you've simply revealed who you truly are without my influence to temper your worst instincts. This is absurd, Jameson sputtered, rising from his chair to pace the room. You can't just waltz back in after all these years and start criticizing my leadership. The board trusts me, the employees respect me, the market values the Carmichael name, I interrupted calmly. A name that carries both our legacies, whether you've acknowledged my part or not. What exactly are you proposing? He demanded, stopping his pacing to stare down at me. I took a deep breath, laying out the plan I'd formulated during the sleepless night at Brandon's apartment. A joint statement acknowledging my role as co-founder and my majority ownership. My immediate installation as chairperson of the board. A comprehensive review of the company's current strategies and a course correction where needed. And if I refuse? Jameson challenged, though his tone, lacked its usual confidence. Then I call an emergency board meeting, present my evidence, and force the issue. I replied. I'd prefer to do this with dignity, Jameson, to give you the opportunity to frame this as a positive development rather than a humiliating exposure. But make no mistake, this will happen, with or without your cooperation. The office fell silent as Jameson absorbed my words. I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, weighing his options, his potential losses, his remaining leverage. You'd really do that? He asked finally. You'd really tear apart everything we've built? Everything I've worked for? I'm not tearing anything apart, I corrected him gently. I'm reclaiming what was always partly mine. The only destruction happening here is of the false narrative you've created. Brandon cleared his throat, drawing all our attention. Dad, listen to what Mom's offering. She's not trying to push you out completely. She's offering a chance to correct a wrong while preserving your dignity. That's more than most people would do in her position. Jameson looked at our son, really looked at him, perhaps seeing for the first time not just his heir, but a young man with his own moral compass, his own sense of justice. You really believe that? He asked Brandon. You really think she's being reasonable? More than reasonable, Brandon confirmed. She could destroy your reputation completely if she wanted to. Instead, she's offering partnership. Lila, who had been watching this exchange with growing concern, finally spoke up. Jamie, maybe you should consider what they're saying. If these documents are real, fighting this could make things messy. The fact that even Lila was suggesting compromise seemed to shock Jameson more than anything else that had happened. He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older, more vulnerable than I had seen him in years. Partnership, he repeated, testing the word like an unfamiliar taste. After everything, you want partnership? I want recognition, I clarified. I want justice. I want my place at the table. Whether that becomes a functional partnership depends entirely on you. Our eyes locked across the space between us. Decades of history. Love, betrayal, ambition, resentment, flowing through that silent connection. The board meets on Tuesday, Jameson said finally. That gives us 3 days to draft a joint statement and prepare a presentation explaining this transition. It wasn't acceptance yet, but it was acknowledgement of the inevitable. I nodded, feeling neither triumph nor vindication, only a profound relief that the truth, so long buried, was finally emerging into the light. I'll have my lawyer contact yours to begin drafting the necessary documents, I said, rising from my chair with a newfound confidence. Brandon, are you ready to go? Our son stood, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. Actually, I think I'd like to stay and talk with Dad for a while. If that's okay with you? The question was directed at me, not Jameson, a subtle but significant shift in family dynamics that wasn't lost on any of us. Of course, I agreed, gathering my purse and the precious envelope. I'll be at the Westport House if you need me. The Westport House, a small cottage on the water that had been my one personal indulgence, purchased with a small inheritance from my mother years ago. It was the one place Jameson had never quite managed to make his own, perhaps because he found it too modest, too lacking in the grandeur he craved. As I moved toward the door, Lila awkwardly stepped aside to let me pass. Our eyes met briefly, woman to woman, not wife to mistress, and I saw in her expression a new uncertainty, a reassessment of the narrative she had accepted about me, about Jameson, about the future she had envisioned for herself. Good luck, I said quietly, meaning it more than she could possibly understand. In the grand entrance hall, I paused to look around at the mansion that had been my prison and showcase for so many years. The crystal chandelier, the marble floors, the carefully curated artwork, all of it suddenly seemed hollow, props in a play I was no longer obligated to perform. I stepped outside into the spring sunshine, taking my first deep breath as Eleanor Carmichael, co-founder and majority owner of Carmichael Enterprises, rather than simply Jameson's wife. The weight of silence had been lifted, and in its place was something new and unfamiliar, a future entirely of my own making. The Westport cottage welcomed me like an old friend. Unlike the Greenwich mansion with its imposing grandeur and cold perfection, this place had always felt like an extension of myself, modest but dignified, comfortable without being showy, beautiful in its authenticity rather than its expense. I moved through the rooms, running my fingers along the weathered bookshelves and well-loved furniture. The windows overlooking the water were open, allowing the salt-tinged breeze to fill the space with the promise of renewal. This had been my sanctuary over the years, the one place where I could be simply Eleanor rather than Mrs. Jameson, Carmichael. Now it would be my base of operations as I reclaimed not just my role in the company, but my very sense of self. I spent the next 2 days preparing methodically. The skills I had honed building Carmichael Enterprises now turned toward rebuilding my own life. I contacted Patricia Winters, a formidable attorney I had quietly befriended at charity events over the years, and arranged for her to represent me in the negotiations ahead. I pulled together files I had privately maintained documenting my contributions to the company, ideas Jameson had implemented after dismissing them as mine, strategies he had claimed credit for, innovations that had made millions under his name rather than mine. Brandon called regularly, updating me on the shifting atmosphere at the Greenwich house. Jameson oscillated between rage, bargaining, and reluctant acceptance. Lila had packed her things and retreated to her own apartment, sensing perhaps that the future she had been promised was no longer certain. "He's scared, Mom," Brandon said during one of our calls. "I've never seen him like this before." "Fear can be transformative," I replied, thinking of my own journey from terrified silence to determined action. "It can strip away pretense and force us to confront who we really are." "Do you think there's any chance he could actually change?" Brandon asked, the hope in his voice reminding me that despite everything, this was still his father, still the man he had idolized for much of his life. "I don't know," I answered honestly. Real change requires two things Jameson has always struggled with: self-awareness and humility. But stranger things have happened. By Monday evening, the joint statement had been drafted, revised, and finalized by our respective legal teams. The press conference was scheduled for Wednesday morning, following the Tuesday board meeting where my role would be officially acknowledged. Everything was proceeding with a surreal efficiency, as if the universe itself was eager to correct a long-standing imbalance. I was reviewing the final documents when a knock came at my door. The sun was setting over the water, casting long golden rays across my living room floor. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a brief, irrational moment, I wondered if Jameson had come to make one last attempt to dissuade me. Instead, I opened the door to find a silver-haired man with kind eyes, the stranger who had handed me the envelope at Brandon's graduation. "May I come in?" he asked simply. I stepped aside wordlessly, too surprised by his appearance to do anything else. "My name is Daniel Hargrove," he said as he entered, glancing around the cottage with appreciative eyes. "I was Robert Carmichael's attorney and friend for over 40 years. "The envelope," I said, finding my voice. "You've been holding it all this time?" Daniel nodded, settling into an armchair by the window. "Robert made me promise to wait for the right moment. You'll know when she needs it," he told me, When I saw Jameson introducing that young woman as his partner at Brandon's graduation, heard him call you the dumb wife, loud enough for half the audience to hear, I knew the time had come. Why did Robert wait? I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind since opening the envelope. Why not tell me himself before he died? Daniel sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of complicated loyalties. Robert loved his son, despite his flaws. He wanted to give Jameson the chance to make things right on his own. He hoped that as he faced his own mortality, Jameson might reflect on the important things in life: truth, fairness, recognition of others' contributions. But he didn't, I concluded. No, Daniel agreed. If anything, from what Robert observed, Jameson became more determined to secure his legacy as the sole architect of Carmichael Enterprises. When Robert realized his son would never voluntarily acknowledge your role, he made arrangements to ensure the truth would eventually come to light. Through you, I said. Daniel nodded. Robert knew that transferring ownership to you while he was alive would create a family war. This way, he gave Jameson 3 years to evolve on his own. When that didn't happen, the truth found its way to you nonetheless. I moved to the window, watching the last rays of sunset paint the water in shades of amber and gold. I've been angry with Robert too, you know, for seeing the truth but remaining silent for so long, for being complicit in my erasure. He regretted that deeply at the end, Daniel said quietly. He told me once that watching Jameson take credit for your ideas was the greatest failure of his life as a father, that he had raised a son who believed success justified any means. The revelation didn't erase the years of hurt, but it offered a new perspective, a reminder that even those who witness injustice can struggle with how to address it, especially when it involves people they love. Thank you, I said finally, turning back to face Daniel. Not just for delivering the envelope, but for doing it with such perfect timing, for giving me back my voice when I needed it most. Daniel smiled, rising from his chair. I was merely the messenger, Eleanor. You're the one who found the courage to speak. Robert would be proud of how you've handled this, with dignity rather than vengeance, with clarity rather than bitterness. As he moved toward the door, he paused, reaching into his jacket pocket. One more thing. Robert left this for you as well. He asked me to give it to you. Only after you had taken your rightful place at Carmichael Enterprises. He handed me a small velvet box, worn around the edges as if it had been opened and closed many times over the years. What is it? I asked, turning the box in my hands. Open it after tomorrow's board meeting, Daniel advised with a gentle smile. Consider it Robert's final vote of confidence. After he left, I placed the mysterious box on my bedside table and returned to my preparations for the following day. Whatever it contained would have to wait. Tomorrow would require all my strength, all my focus, all my conviction. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the sleek conference room on the top floor of Carmichael Tower. I arrived 30 minutes early, dressed in a tailored navy suit that projected confidence without ostentation. Patricia Winters arrived shortly after, her briefcase containing all the documentation we might need to address any challenges to my position. Ready? She asked as we waited in the anteroom. Ready, I confirmed, surprised to find that it was true. The anxiety I had expected was absent, replaced by a calm certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. Board members began arriving one by one, some familiar faces who had known me in the early days, others newer additions who knew me only as Jameson's seldom-seen wife. Their expressions ranged from confusion to curiosity to barely concealed excitement at the drama unfolding in their normally predictable corporate world. Jameson arrived last, Brandon at his side. My son gave me a subtle nod of encouragement as they took their seats at the opposite end of the conference table. Jameson's face was carefully neutral, his usual commanding presence somewhat diminished by the circumstances. The board chairman, Walter Donovan, an old friend of Robert's who had always treated me with particular kindness, called the meeting to order. As you've all been informed, we have a rather unusual matter to address today, he began, his deep voice resonating through the room. Jameson has requested the opportunity to make a statement before we proceed. All eyes turned to Jameson, who rose slowly from his chair. For a moment, he simply stood there, his gaze fixed on some middle distance as if gathering his thoughts. Then he looked directly at me, and I saw something unexpected in his eyes, not resentment or anger, but a weary acceptance. 25 years ago, he began, his voice steady, but lacking its usual bombastic confidence. I founded Carmichael Enterprises with a vision of creating innovative solutions for complex logistical problems. What I didn't acknowledge then, what I haven't acknowledged for over 2 decades, is that I didn't do it alone. A murmur ran through the board members as Jameson continued. Eleanor Carmichael was not just my wife during those years. She was my partner, my strategist, the creative force behind many of our most successful initiatives. The Martinson-Hayes distribution model, the pivot to sustainable materials, the Pacific Rim expansion, these were primarily Eleanor's vision, her expertise, her genius. The admission, so long denied, now filled the room with its simple truth. I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, a vindication so profound it brought unexpected tears to my eyes. My father recognized this truth before he died, Jameson continued. He took steps to ensure that Eleanor's contributions would not remain in the shadows forever. Those steps included transferring 51% ownership of Carmichael Enterprises to her, a decision I initially resisted but now understand was an attempt to correct a long-standing injustice. He paused, his gaze moving from board member to board member. Effective immediately, I am acknowledging Eleanor Carmichael as the co-founder and majority shareholder of Carmichael Enterprises. I am recommending her immediate installation as chairperson of the board, with full authority to review and redirect the company's strategies as she sees fit. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by Brandon's quiet but deliberate applause. Slowly, other board members joined in, the sound growing until it filled the room with a recognition that was 23 years overdue. Walter Donovan called for a formal vote, which passed unanimously. Just like that, with a simple show of hands, I was officially recognized as what I had always been, the co-creator of Carmichael Enterprises, the architect of its most visionary strategies, the rightful leader of its future direction. As the meeting concluded and board members approached to offer congratulations and welcome, I caught Jameson's eye across the room. There was resignation in his expression, but also something else. Perhaps relief? The burden of maintaining a lie for so long must have been exhausting in its own way. Brandon embraced me warmly. Congratulations, Mom. Or should I say, Madam Chairperson. I laughed, the sound freer and lighter than it had been in years. Just Mom is still my favorite title. As the boardroom emptied, Jameson approached, maintaining a careful distance. The press conference is at 10 a.m. tomorrow. My team has prepared the statement we agreed upon. Thank you, I said simply. He hesitated, clearly struggling with what to say next. Eleanor, Not now, Jameson, I interrupted gently. We have time for personal reconciliations later, if that's even possible. Today is about the company, about the truth, about moving forward. With integrity. He nodded, accepting the boundary. Fair enough. I'll see you tomorrow. As he walked away, Brandon squeezed my shoulder. You did it, Mom. You really did it. We did it. I corrected him. I couldn't have found the courage without you. That night, back at the Westport cottage, I finally opened the velvet box Daniel Hargrove had delivered. Inside was a simple gold pin, an antiques piece shaped like a key, with a small note in Robert Carmichael's distinctive handwriting. Eleanor, the key to the kingdom was always yours. Now everyone will know it. With admiration and regret, Robert. I pinned it to the lapel of the jacket I'd selected for tomorrow's press conference, knowing that Robert would be there in spirit, witnessing the final act of his attempt to right a long-standing wrong. Tomorrow, the world would learn the truth. But tonight, in the quiet of my sanctuary, that truth already felt like the most precious possession I had ever owned. The press conference was held in the grand atrium of Carmichael Tower, a soaring space of glass and steel that had always symbolized the company's ambition and success. Now it was filled with journalists, cameras, employees, and industry observers, all drawn by the cryptic press release promising a significant announcement regarding the leadership and history of Carmichael Enterprises. I stood backstage, watching through a monitor as people filled the seats arranged in neat rows before the podium. The gold keypin gleamed on my lapel, catching the light each time I moved. It felt like a talisman, a physical reminder that I was exactly where I belonged. Brandon appeared at my side, handsome in a charcoal suit that made him look older, more established. Nervous? He asked. Surprisingly, no, I replied. It feels like I've been preparing for this moment my entire life. He smiled, adjusting his tie. You have been, in a way. Jameson joined us, maintaining a professional distance that acknowledged our new dynamic, colleagues rather than husband and wife, co-leaders rather than dominant and submissive. The board members are seated in the front row, he informed us. Walter will introduce us, then I'll make the initial statement, followed by Eleanor. Questions will be limited to 15 minutes. I nodded, appreciating the structure, even as I marveled at how quickly our roles had shifted. Just days. Ago, I would have been expected to stand silently by his side, a decorative accessory to his moment in the spotlight. Now we were equals, at least publicly. "It's time," said the PR director, motioning us toward the stage entrance. The lights were blinding as we walked onto the platform, the murmur of the crowd falling to a hush as Walter Donovan approached the microphone. "Good morning, and thank you for joining us," he began, his authoritative voice commanding immediate attention. "Today marks a significant milestone in the history of Carmichael Enterprises, a moment of truth, recognition, and new beginnings. I'll now turn the podium over to Jameson Carmichael, CEO." Jameson stepped forward, his public persona firmly in place despite the circumstances. If you didn't know him as well as I did, you might not notice the slight tension in his shoulders, the barely perceptible tightness around his eyes. "For 25 years, he began, his voice carrying confidently through the atrium, "I have had the privilege of leading Carmichael Enterprises from a small logistics consulting firm to the global enterprise it is today. During that time, I have been credited as the founder, the visionary, the driving force behind our success." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the audience. "That narrative, while partially true, has been incomplete in one crucial aspect. From the very beginning, Carmichael Enterprises has been the product of a partnership, a creative and strategic collaboration between myself and Eleanor Carmichael." A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Journalists leaning forward in their seats, photographers adjusting their angles to better capture my reaction. Eleanor's contributions, her innovations, her strategies, her unique perspective have been instrumental to our success from day one. The Martinson-Hayes distribution model, our groundbreaking sustainability initiatives, our expansion into Asian markets, these were primarily Eleanor's vision, her expertise, her genius. Each acknowledgement felt like the unlocking of a door that had been sealed shut for decades, allowing light to flood into rooms long kept dark. Due to personal choices and industry dynamics of the time, Eleanor's role was not publicly acknowledged. This was a mistake, my mistake, and one that I am correcting today. Jameson turned slightly toward me, a gesture of inclusion that would have been unthinkable just days ago. "Recently, it came to light that my father, Robert Carmichael, took steps before his death to ensure that Eleanor's contributions would not remain unrecognized forever. Those steps included transferring majority ownership of Carmichael Enterprises to her, a decision that reflects the true balance of our original partnership." The revelation sent a visible shockwave through the audience. Reporters were typing furiously on laptops or phones, photographers' cameras clicking in rapid succession to capture the historic moment. Effective immediately, Eleanor Carmichael is officially recognized as co-founder of Carmichael Enterprises and has been installed as chairperson of the board. We will be working together to guide the company into its next chapter, one built on innovation, integrity, and proper recognition of all contributions. Jameson stepped back, gesturing for me to take his place at the podium. As we passed each other, our eyes met briefly. There was no warmth there, no reconciliation, but there was respect. Perhaps for the first time in many years, I approached the microphone, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon me. The moment stretched, pregnant with possibility and power. I was no longer invisible, no longer silent, no longer the dumb wife standing in her husband's shadow. "Thank you, Jameson," I began, my voice strong and clear, "and thank you all for being here today." I looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, most unknown, and felt a profound sense of rightness, of completion. The story of Carmichael Enterprises has always been one of innovation, of finding creative solutions to complex problems. Today, we're simply correcting the narrative to include all the authors of that story. I touched the key pin on my lapel, drawing strength from its symbolic presence. I accept this recognition not just for myself, but for all the invisible partners, the uncredited collaborators, the silent contributors whose ideas have shaped industries while their names remained in the shadows. Your work matters, your vision matters, and the truth, even when delayed, matters most of all. The room was silent, captivated by words that felt more authentic, more meaningful than the usual corporate pronouncements. As chairperson, my first priority will be a comprehensive review of our current strategies with particular attention to returning to the core values that built this company: innovation with integrity, profit with purpose, growth with responsibility. I believe Carmichael Enterprises can lead not just in market share, but in creating a model for how businesses can thrive while honoring the full contributions of all team members. I paused, allowing my gaze to find Brandon in the front row, his eyes shining with pride. Someone recently reminded me that silence isn't a gift. It's surrender. Today, I'm reclaiming my voice not to dwell on past injustices, but to ensure that our future is built on truth, recognition, and shared success. The questions that followed were predictable, about the timing of the revelation, about my plans for the company, about how this would affect the dynamic between Jameson and me going forward. I answered each with a calm confidence that felt both new and familiar, as if I was finally stepping into a role I had been rehearsing for my entire life. When asked about potential animosity between Jameson and me, I simply said, "We built a company together once before. We can certainly guide it together now, with the benefit of transparency and mutual respect." The final question came from a young female reporter near the back. "Mrs. Carmichael, what would you say to other women whose contributions might be going unrecognized in their fields?" I considered the question carefully, aware that my answer would reach beyond the atrium walls to women in countless industries, relationships, and situations. I would say that your work has value, whether others acknowledge it or not. Your ideas matter, your voice matters, your presence matters. Find allies who see your worth, document your contributions, and never accept erasure as the price of peace. As the press conference concluded and we moved to a private reception with board members and key executives, I felt a profound sense of closure combined with new beginnings. The path that had led me here, from ambitious young woman to silenced wife to reclaimed leader, had been neither straight nor easy. But standing now in the full light of recognition, I understood that every step had been necessary to reach this moment. Later that evening, as the headlines began appearing online, Carmichael Enterprises reveals shocking truth about its origins. The woman behind the empire, Eleanor Carmichael, steps into the light. Corporate America's hidden architect finally gets her due. I sat on the deck of my Westport cottage, watching the stars emerge over the water. Brandon joined me, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "To new beginnings," he said, passing one to me. "And to truth," I added, touching my glass to his. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the gentle lapping of waves against the shore providing a soothing backdrop to our thoughts. "What happens with you and Dad now?" Brandon asked finally, the question he'd been carefully avoiding all day. I considered it, watching the moonlight create a silver path across the dark water. "I don't know exactly," I admitted. "We'll work together professionally. We both care too much about the company to let personal issues interfere with that. As for our marriage," I trailed off, realizing I hadn't actually considered that aspect of the future. "It's been over for a long time, hasn't it?" Brandon said softly, more statement than question. "Yes," I acknowledged. "The truth is, we've been living separate lives under the same roof for years. This just brings that reality into the open." Brandon nodded, processing this confirmation of what he had probably sensed for some time. "Are you sad about that? About the end of my marriage?" "No, not anymore. I'm sad about what it became, about the years I spent diminishing myself to maintain a facade. But I'm not sad about moving forward authentically. I think Grandfather would be proud," Brandon said after a moment. "Of both of us, actually. You for reclaiming your voice, and me for standing with the truth even when it meant challenging Dad." I reached over to squeeze his hand, overwhelmed by gratitude for this thoughtful young man who had somehow emerged whole and principled, despite the complicated dynamics of his family. "Your grandfather once told me something I never forgot," I shared. "He said that success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you contribute. I think he'd be very proud of the man you've become, Brandon. Very proud indeed." As if on cue, my phone chimed with a text message. It was from Daniel Hargrove. "Robert would be pleased. You've done exactly what he hoped. Reclaimed your place with dignity rather than vengeance. The key always belonged to you." I touched the gold pin still attached to my lapel, feeling a connection across time to the man who had seen the truth even when his own son could not. "What now, Mom?" Brandon asked, his young face serious in the moonlight. "What does Eleanor Carmichael do next?" The question hung in the air between us, full of possibility. For the first time in decades, my future was unwritten, undefined by Jameson's expectations or limitations. "I think," I said slowly, "Eleanor Carmichael finally gets to decide that for herself." The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. A blank page waiting to be filled with my own words, my own vision, my own truth. After 23 years of silence, my voice had returned, stronger and clearer than ever before. And this time, the world was listening. You can be invisible to the world, I said, softly, echoing the thought that had sustained me through the darkest moments of this journey. But once you claim your voice, you become unstoppable, and no one can ever take that away from you. Brandon smiled, raising his glass once more. To being unstoppable, he offered. To being unstoppable, I agreed, the words feeling not just like a toast, but like a promise. To myself, to the woman I had been, and to the woman I was finally free to become.